welcome back to the Chaotic Little Book Corner. My name's Acacia. Today we're going to be doing the Gobbleathon Wrap-Up. So this is going to be a quick little video. I will be doing my November Part 2 wrap-up very soon. It should be posted this week, but these are the 7 books that I finished during the wrap-up. The readathon, I will also mention them in the wrap-up, but this will be where I will discuss them a little more in depth. If you want to see fuller reviews on any of them, let me know down below in the comments. There will be one that will be further explored later on, but I have to read the other book that was sent to me by that publisher. You guys will know what I'm talking about in a moment. My bow is like sideways. Oh well. So the challenge number 1 was to read a book, and that was this. This is A Tree, a Person, or a Wall by Matt Bell. This is a short story collection. It's actually relatively long compared to most of the short story collections. It's nearly 400 pages. I had dived in prior to the readathon, and I'd already fallen in love with it, and then as I read further on, I just sat down and read it for the readathon, and I absolutely adored it. It is horror meets fairy tales meets weird, quirky strangeness, and very, very experimental. It's very experimental. The characters don't usually have names. They usually just are identified in certain ways. The fairy tale references are more as if it feels like a dark fairy tale. It feels a little more Grimm-esque than it does like magical fairy tales. It just feels very Grimm-esque, sort of dark and weird and twisted and really strange with a little bit of a moral fiber underneath. It's very interesting, and there's some interesting social commentary in here about sexual predators, and which was really weird because I wasn't expecting that at all. There's some interesting commentary on that. There's some interesting commentary on growing up as a child. It was just really fascinating. I absolutely loved it. My top 5 short story collections of all time. Next was to read a poetry collection, and I read this. This is The Princess Saves Herself in this one, and this is by Amanda Lovelace. I read this in one sitting. It is relatively short. It's 153 pages, and it is very short pages. This one took me less than an hour to read. I am in love with it. It made me cry. This made me cry so much, and I loved it so much, and I'm actually just going to read the first poem because I think I might want to get this tattooed on me somewhere. I don't know. The Princess. I was born a little book mad. I could be found stroking the spines of my books while I sat locked alone in my tower bedroom. All the while, I hoped my books would spill their exquisite words over the lush green carpet so I could collect them all one by one and savor them like berries inside my mouth. So it's just really simple, very easy to read. There's a lot of fairy tale driven story plots where she compares herself to the princess and her mother to the queen, and the pain that she goes through. It was stunning. It was absolutely stunning. I really loved it. And then we were challenged to read a nonfiction. It was nonfiction November anyway, so that was no problem. But I ended up picking this. This is Ballerina by Deirdre Kelly, Sex, Scandal, and Suffering Behind the Symbol of Perfection. This was fascinating. I am a huge lover of the ballet. I don't get to see it very often because it is very expensive here where I am. And I've always loved the Nutcracker and Swan Lake, and I've always been fascinated by ballerinas. I always thought they were the most beautiful and eloquent things on the planet. This dives into the history of ballet in a way that if you're really not into ballet, it's not going to make you feel any better. And if you're really not open to something really dark, you're going to get a little angry because this is extremely dark and fascinating. It dives into the history of certain positions and why they were developed. It dives into how ballet was more used as a way to hold class identification in certain times. Women who were ballerinas were viewed as courtesans or prostitutes in some social circles. It was absolutely fascinating, and I think the biggest thing I took away from this was that the ballet has always been viewed as this elusive other, whether they be the elusive other you could catch and use or the elusive other that you couldn't touch or be. And it was fabulous. I really loved it, and I am completely fascinated by it, and I'm hoping I can find more works in this sort of realm, but I don't know if many will be written in the same style that this was, which was very digestible, pretty short. It was about 200 pages, easy to process, and very, very well published, as well as very, very informative. If you're not somebody who likes a nonfiction that is very fact heavy, this may not be for you. But for me, and what I was looking for and what I was hoping for, nailed it. And then we were to read one with brown on the cover, and I am now on a Muriel Spark kick. I'm in this weird zone because I read The Driver's Seat by Muriel Spark and I loved it, fell obsessed. And then this is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, and I liked it, and I'm starting to find that I loved it more than I thought I did, because I'm not able to stop thinking about it. But at the same time, I was very aggravated. I disliked most of the characters. I found it very intensely exhausting for my own brain and very, very stressful. But I'm now finding that I really enjoyed that experience, and I've now gone back and read it twice because I just needed to process some more. I'm hoping to really dive into more conversation with Adam from Memento Mori on this, and then I have a few more coming from Muriel Spark. I really am adoring her author style, and I plan to keep working on reading her works. But this was really interesting, and it was even more interesting because I didn't know if I liked it, and now having the inability to stop thinking about it is causing me to think it's a really good book. And then the next was a book that's foreign, so translated would be this. This is Goth by Otoshiki, and this is from Hirokusoro Press, and this is a translated fiction from the Japanese, I believe. Oh man, okay. I'll be going more in depth with this, with the book that I received from review from them. I have it up here. But this one is a story of a young girl who becomes blindly and intensely obsessed with a serial killer. She is almost to the point of unhealthily obsessed, and she has to try and control herself in this way where she has now begun to lose herself in the murders and the crimes, and lose her own sanity, and become more and more morbidly, intensely involved in the psychology of the murderer. And she and her friends are all becoming very immersed in it, but they're trying to also avoid becoming the next victims because they're so obsessed with finding out more about it that they're almost at the verge of exploiting this serial killer. It was fantastic. I went into this with very, very interesting expectations. I was not sure what I was going into. I never know what I'm really going to go into with a translated fiction, because in those situations, they can either be very well translated or very poorly translated, and that usually defines how the story is executed and portrayed. And this was extremely well translated. It was really beautifully executed. If you enjoy, I really like horror films from Japan, and this really has that eerie, dark, morbid, intensely underworld-esque kind of feel. This really challenges me in certain aspects, because it challenged me to, I've always enjoyed reading from the serial killer's perspective, always, but to be watching a child who's very similar to myself in the undeniable fascination of a serial killer, but at the same time seeing how sick and twisted it is to be obsessed with the serial killer, was really interesting. I very much enjoyed it. I highly recommend it to horror fans and to translated fiction fans, and even more so if you're a fan of Ringu, the original. Fabulous. Next was to read a book with a word from Thanksgiving. I picked this. This is The Opposite House by Helen Oyami, and it is, the word house is what I picked. So this is a story of a young girl who is, okay, So as always, this is a Helen Oyami book, so it's a little more intense. This is one of her earlier works. The next work I'm going to read is The Icarus Girl, which was her first. This is her second novel. This is really different from the other books, but at the same time, it's very similar. So she has a very distinct voice, Helen Oyami does, and I'm going to be doing a full in-depth review of her as an author spotlight later once I finish The Icarus Girl, because I've read all of her works once that's finished. And I can't wait to continue reading her works. She is one of the only authors I plan to read everything she's ever written, because it's just fantastic. So, as always, there's this fairy tale element. The story takes place with a young girl who is pregnant with a little boy, and the initial chapter is her explaining how foreign this child feels within her and how foreign she feels because of herself. So she is a immigrant from, hold on. It was always really good. Okay. So she is an immigrant from the Caribbean to London, and she is in a relationship with a Cuban who has now given her a child. So she is giving birth to a Cuban Caribbean baby in an English-speaking culture. There we go. So she is really, really very frustrated because right now she's having to learn Spanish for her boyfriend. She's having to learn English for this country she's living in, but she doesn't know Swahili or any of the other languages that come from the Caribbean islands or her ancestors. And so she feels very disconnected from her own past, her own family, her own ancestry, and she feels very disconnected from the entire world in that she doesn't feel she has a location or a place, and she feels like she's being defined by the child within her and not her own person. So in this story, on the other side of the reality wall is a girl who lives in the house that's somewhere, and she is also telling her story from the opposite side of the reality wall. So you're jumping back and forth between perspectives, and you're hearing this almost magical fairy tale-esque story from the other side while reading a woman who is struggling to find identity in our world. I really love, admire, and was fascinated by this book because it's so much more experimental than her other works. I think this is a lot more of a first attempt at magical realism, but in that it's a first attempt, it was interesting, but in that it is a first attempt, it's also really genuine, so you really understand a little more of how obscure and strange Oyami can really get, and this really dives into that. Last one was a story about an animal. This is The Foxwoman by Kai Johnson. This story was really interesting. It has three perspectives. One is a fox, one is a gentleman who is obsessed with fox, and one is the wife of the gentleman who is obsessed with foxes. The fox is in love with the man who is obsessed with foxes and the outside world and those out of her own fox life. The wife is struggling to cope with the fact that her husband is in a dreamland around these foxes and losing the money and failing as a husband. And the husband is just in La La Land, basically, and completely immersed in his own ideas and magic of the world. I enjoyed it, and I plan to continue reading Kai Johnson. I don't know what to go to next. So yes, I very much enjoy the writing style. I liked diving into a world of animals. It was really different. It's new from anything else I usually read. I plan to continue with the author. I just am undecided on whether or not it's something I'm absolutely in love with. But with that being said, I don't know how much else of her work I will be going out to track down, if that makes sense. So that's my Gobbleathon wrap-up. I will see you guys in my next video. I love you all.